There were no screams, no pleas for help. Only the faint sound of metal tapping against metal 3 times like a signal. It was 2:27 a.m. in Unit D. On the internal surveillance footage, all that could be seen was a single figure standing watch in the hallway, back turned to the camera. Inside the cell, within a blind spot beyond verification, what happened was never recorded in any medical report or incident log. A female inmate 6 days into acute withdrawal was handled in a way this prison would never document. A method with no medication, no treatment plan, no clinical oversight, just flesh, transaction, and the unspoken law of silence. And the most terrifying part, no one seemed surprised. The incident wasn't uncovered through a report or complaint. It came to light because a newly assigned officer asked the wrong question at lunch. Why is she in a single cell if she has no segregation order? That single question unraveled a chain of events that could no longer be contained, exposing a covert system of sexual servicing for female inmates disguised under the label of emergency withdrawal management. This isn't just a story about sex in prison. It's the consequence of a system too afraid to admit a brutal truth, that the physical and psychological needs of incarcerated women when isolated, addicted, and stripped of autonomy can be weaponized to turn them into tools. And when instinct is twisted into currency, what remains of the human being behind it, we begin on that night. With 3 dry, metallic clicks, and with a figure standing motionless in the hall, a figure who, once the footage was leaked, would trigger an investigation that shook the entire state. No one could say exactly what time the figure began that night's shift. On the duty roster, the overnight watch for Unit D had been left blank, an apparent clerical error repeated often enough that no one bothered to fix it. Only the hallway camera recorded this at 2:11 a.m. A figure appeared in the blind spot near cell D17. No visible face, no badge, a black coat, a hood pulled low. He said nothing. He stood there for 27 minutes, unmoving, eyes locked on a single door, the one labeled with the internal classification code, C-Red-N. Every prison has its own cryptic terms for sensitive situations. At Franklin Facility, C-Red-N stood for critical, red zone, narcotic risk, used to flag inmates with histories of high-risk drug use known to experience seizures or psychotic breaks during withdrawal. But the strange part was the medical file for the inmate in D17 listed no history of drug abuse. Just one brief line. Exhibiting signs of psychological instability, monitor separately. And yet that night in Unit D there was no nurse on duty, no doctor on call. Only a silent figure standing guard, and a faint sound echoing from the door, 3 metallic taps. Clink, clack, clink. A signal. Not taught in any manual, but everyone knew what it meant. The man turned toward the hallway camera once, just once. His face remained indistinct, but in the grainy frame a glint from the fluorescent light caught something on his collar. Not a badge, but a small round silver sticker with a red ring around it. The temporary insignia for the Emergency Internal Response Unit. At Franklin, that phrase was code. It meant, do not report this. No one knows what happened behind that door. But the next morning, inmate D17 was escorted into the hallway, walking unsteadily, both arms wrapped around her midsection, staring blankly at the wall, as if someone had taken her apart from the inside and put her back together wrong. The only person who spoke to her was a medical intern 3 days into his first week. He asked, "Are you okay?" D17 didn't answer. She just smiled. The kind of smile that later made the intern quit his job altogether. A smile that looked like someone was strangling her from behind, and if she didn't smile, she'd scream. That afternoon, all video footage from Unit D was quietly replaced with a duplicate shorter by exactly 46 minutes. The official explanation was technical malfunction. But when the maintenance team accessed the backup drive, they discovered something strange. The missing footage hadn't been overwritten. It had been substituted, replaced by another segment showing an empty hallway. No movement, no sound, no one on watch. As if the man who had stood there in silence for 27 minutes had never existed. 3 weeks later, inmate D17 was transferred to the reintegration wing. Her file was updated to read stable, no further symptoms. But her new cellmate, a woman named Erica, later recalled that every night she would hear 3 soft metal taps from the edge of D17's bed. Clink, clack, clink. When Erica asked, "What are you doing?" D17 said nothing. She simply placed her hand over her chest and tapped 3 times with her fingernail, then whispered, "It helps me remember I can still feel." No one ever saw the man from that night again. But in the Franklin prison's shift logbook, the page assigned to that night had been half torn out, faded handwriting barely visible with one line remaining. "Stay silent. Stay silent. Stay silent." The signature beneath had been scrubbed away with bleach. Behind the prison, the laundry zone had long been removed from the official operational map. It was a sunken slab of cracked concrete between 2 decaying blocks that new recruits jokingly called the memory pit. No cameras, no sensors, no footsteps unless someone was forced to pass through. And that afternoon, someone was. Her name was May, 28 years old, convicted of excessive force in a case of self-defense. A prisoner classified as internally stable, reflexively dangerous. May had been assigned to rotating laundry duty under a special disciplinary shift. That day was her final trip to the old wash area. The folding table was a worn slab of gray granite chipped at the corners, its surface polished smooth by years of soapy water. And at the center of the table, where a single shaft of light cut through rusted ceiling bars, there was a yellow stain in the shape of a human hand. 5 fingers, clear as bone, chillingly precise. May bent down and wiped it with a cloth. The stain didn't fade. She tried soap. No difference. At that moment, from underneath the table came a soft tapping, like someone gently hitting the hollow underside of the granite with a metal spoon. Tap, tap, tap. 3 beats. Spaced. Steady. Not frantic. Not random. Almost like a code. May looked up. No one was in the area. Only a row of fractured walls and a wooden door sealed shut with a rusted chain. That night, May asked her cellmate, "Have you ever heard anything about the old laundry room?" The woman, her name was Marla, turned her head, avoiding May's eyes. "I just know someone once went in and never came back out." Who May pressed. Marla hesitated, then answered quietly, "A guard." 2 days later, May returned to the laundry zone in secret. She didn't bring clothes. No laundry cart. Just a plastic knife meant for slicing bars of soap. This time she carefully pried at the edge of the granite slab where the handprint had been. And just as she suspected, that section of stone was looser. After about 15 minutes of slow, deliberate work, the piece came free. Beneath it was a hollow cavity. Inside, wrapped tightly in 3 layers of decaying rain ponchos, was an old plastic bag. May opened it. Inside was a damp, fragile notebook. The ink had run in places, but one entry remained legible: day 12. I was ordered not to let her speak to anyone. But today she handed me a piece of paper. It said, "If I disappear tomorrow, look at the wash table like it's the face of someone gagged." I don't understand. But her hands were shaking, and her eyes, like they couldn't wait any longer. May closed the notebook. She stood still. Someone had once tried to bury a memory beneath that slab, not to accuse, but to survive the weight of witnessing something and doing nothing. That night, May didn't sleep. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring into her own open palm. And for the first time in 4 years behind bars, she didn't think about the person who had put her in prison. She thought about the handprint, about someone who had once tried to speak, but had only enough strength left to leave a trace that didn't need a name, only to be seen. The next day, a facility inspection team was dispatched to the laundry area due to irregularities in the plumbing system. No one mentioned the notebook. No one saw the handprint again. The table was polished clean. Only May, the one person who still remembered, silently stitched a message onto the back of her prison uniform, using thread pulled from the edge of her blanket. "If you wash here, please don't wash away the memory of the one who came before." The basement records room never had a name, just a code K12. No one stayed there longer than 3 months except for one person. Her name was Iris Lane. Position temporary internal administrative clerk. Assignment review, classify and destroy duplicate files, misformatted documents, or anything deemed no longer aligned with current structural standards. Temporary. Yet she'd worked there for nearly 7 years. That day, when a file box marked TRN 994 UNC was wheeled in without an accompanying clearance code, Iris merely raised an eyebrow. She had seen many things: medical records stripped of names, disciplinary reports crossed out 3 times in red ink, even handwritten letters wedged between pages of procedural memos. But box TRN 994 smelled different. Not like mildew or the usual basement dampness. It reeked of disinfectant. Harsh, sterile, stronger than the scent of aged paper. Iris put on gloves and opened the box. The documents inside were sealed. No file marked "Delete," no tag saying "Archive." Only a single slip clipped to the first folder, reviewed, "Does not align with current template." She flipped the first page. A black and white photograph. The girl in the image was curled in a corner of a cell, dark circles under her eyes, cracked lips, cloth restraints around her wrists. But her gaze was razor-sharp. Beneath the photo, a caption, "Lena Morris, transferred under temporary memory management protocol." Iris frowned. That protocol had been officially removed from all internal policy documents 4 years ago. No one used the phrase anymore. No one brought it up, except those who had seen it in action. The next document was a handwritten transcript of a recording. I don't remember the name of the one interrogating me, but I remember the smell of bleach. Every time they wiped the table, I knew the next part of my story would be erased. And if I remembered it wrong, that version would be kept, to be used against me. Iris sat still. She knew exactly what technique that was: forced cognitive dissonance, a method of memory extraction where the subject is pushed to doubt their own truth until the memory rewrites itself without physical interference. It had been piloted internally for 3 months, then quietly discontinued. All related reports by directive had been marked no longer applicable. Iris closed the box, but she didn't place it in the delete bin. Instead, she walked straight to the surveillance office and handed the file to the supervisor. "I need an official destruction order." The supervisor flipped through the contents without reading, then looked up. "This is a shadow file. You know the procedure." Iris replied calmly, "I do. But if I erase it, I'll be the last person to ever see it." The supervisor narrowed his eyes. "And what are you afraid of?" That the truth will escape from a temporary employee, Iris didn't answer. She wasn't afraid of the truth escaping. She was afraid that one day she'd become like Lena, distorted by a memory no one else could verify. That night, inside the elevator descending to level B3, Iris opened the box once more. Lena's final letter was tucked between dense procedural documents. It read, "I know they'll blur me out with bleach. But remember this, if one day someone smells that scent in a place no one's cleaned in years, it means some part of me survived." Beneath the wiped paper, beneath the deletion orders, there are things that don't disappear, just because someone didn't want to see them. Iris resealed the box, but this time, instead of placing it in the delete bin, she slid it into the very back compartment of drawer 7 behind 3 layers of files no one ever reviewed. She didn't keep it because she wanted to be a hero. She kept it because if she didn't, then Lena and that sterile chemical scent would become nothing more than a blank spot on a nameless page. His name was Caleb Wynne. No one in the facility knew Caleb by face, only by his internal designation, Scribe 6A, the one assigned to rewrite inmate data algorithms to optimize retrieval and eliminate non-essential memory traces. In simpler terms, he erased memories through code, not through drugs, not through interrogation, just through lines of logic. One night, while updating legacy syntax from as far back as 2072, an outdated system long marked retired, Caleb stumbled upon a sealed data block flagged Lena M1, uncontainable memory signature, corrupted. The name Lena didn't appear in any official inmate logs. No medical records, no transfer requests, no death report. Only a single line of metadata: cannot delete, cannot transfer, cannot silence. Caleb didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in code, and code he thought always had a breakpoint. But when he attempted to debug the segment, the system returned no error. Just an endless echo loop repeating a single phrase: if this is gone, something inside still remembers. If this is gone, something inside still remembers. If this is gone. He sat frozen in front of the screen. No one codes like that. No one leaves an echo loop in production code unless someone wanted someone else to find it. Caleb ran a simulation of the line, and the system didn't register it. As if the segment didn't exist, yet still ran in the background. A line of code that was dead to the system, but alive to the one who found it. Caleb began tracing legacy versions, digging into the older frameworks where the Lena segment had once been activated. The deeper he looked, the more fragmented things became. The more he read, the clearer one truth became: she wasn't a prisoner. She was a response, programmed by the system itself to resist it. The code logs stopped reading like sterile lines of syntax. They began to contain things that shouldn't exist. A message fragment with no source address. If I no longer have a name, use this code as a crack in the wall. A neural pattern simulation written in the language of emotional memory encoding. A transcript of an interrogation, but with no questions, only blank spaces, and the sound of a heartbeat. Caleb didn't report his findings. He extracted the segment and encrypted it with a key based on his own birth timestamp. Then he submitted a system note reviewed. No anomalies found. But on an old USB drive tucked in the corner of his desk, he carved one line with a small blade. Some echoes are born without a mouth, because some memories speak without ever being spoken. That night, for the first time in 6 years, Caleb shut down all his monitors. He stepped into the hallway. In the dim light, he saw the name Lena faintly written in pencil on the back side of the door's glass, as if someone had once stood there watching the very room he had just left. Maybe it was someone. Or maybe it was the code once written by hand. If memory is something that can be erased, then Lena is gone. But if memory is a kind of code that cannot die, then maybe she's still running. As dead code. Inside systems we believed were already clean. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense. No leather cover, no clear dates, no markings to reveal who had written it. Just a stack of old folded pages tucked deep beneath the corner of a metal table in Laundry Room 6 where yellow light spilled across rust-stained surfaces and the smell of bleach lingered in the air, like the breath of memories that had never been scrubbed clean. The one who found it was a new recruit named Ariel. She was reaching to pick up a fallen pen when her fingers brushed against the worn edge of the paper. Something instinctive made her pull it out without reporting it to anyone. In the facility, an action like that could be considered a security violation, but Ariel didn't throw it away. She took it back to her room and read it in secret during lights out, by the dim glow of a mini flashlight hidden beneath her mattress. The first line made her stop cold. That day I didn't scream. Not because I couldn't, but because I knew the sound would get swallowed by the washing machines. No one hears a scream inside the spin cycle. The pages that followed had no name, no place, just fragments of a memory frayed and aching. It might have come from a prisoner or someone who once worked here. The handwriting was uneven, the ink sometimes bold, sometimes faded with blank spaces that felt less like omissions and more like fear. And it was those spaces that disturbed her most. I used to think this place was just a prison. Then I learned, when you're buried alive in silence, even memory can rot. Ariel couldn't look away. Not out of curiosity, but because something in those words reflected the silence she herself was enduring. As a new recruit, she had been trained to suppress emotion, to avoid questions, and never to dwell on what came before. But each sentence whispered to her I was pulled into an agreement I never consented to out loud. They didn't ask. They just did, and waited to see if I'd scream. The final page was nearly blank, save for one blurred line, ink bled by water. If someone finds this, don't return it. Read it, then choose to leave this place with your own memory, not the version they hand you. Ariel folded the pages. She didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, as she quietly walked past the old laundry room, she looked at the metal table for the first time, realizing it wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a witness never called to testify. A few days later, the pages vanished. No one said anything. No one asked. But Ariel began to write by memory, by feeling, by the voice that had now taken root inside her. Because sometimes the only way to remember someone who has been forgotten is to tell their story as if it were your own. And from that moment in the corner of that old table, a new memory began to carve itself into existence, not with ink, but with choice not to forget. At W Delta Penitentiary, there were many things never put on paper. But what unsettled people the most wasn't the death sentences, nor the shrill metal groans echoing through the halls. At night, it was a name that had never appeared in any record. He was known by a single letter, J, no surname, no birth date, no inmate number, no listed reason for incarceration. Every field was left blank intentionally. In the system, his name field showed nothing, and under reason for detention was a strange symbol, null. It wasn't an error. It was deliberate erasure. Jay lived in the deepest level of solitary confinement where no cameras were installed and no guard was permanently assigned. The only person ever sent to clean Jay's cell, a new recruit named Carter, resigned after just 3 days, offering no clear explanation. On his resignation form, he simply wrote, "I saw myself in his eyes, and that made me too afraid to sleep again." Jay never screamed, never resisted. He would sit for hours in silence, as if listening to something no one else could hear anymore. His head bowed slightly, eyes fixed on a crack in the concrete ceiling that veined across like an exposed artery. Once another inmate began screaming in the night, overwhelmed by hallucinations. Jay looked through the observation slit and smiled. That smile made the guard turn on the floodlight, and shortly after the screaming inmate requested immediate transfer. Layla, then just a Level 3 monitoring officer, stumbled upon Jay's existence while reviewing an unencrypted data file. It contained an old audio clip labeled, "Do not use the scrape of a chair against stone," a long exhale, and a voice barely more than breath if they ask. "Tell them I never existed." She couldn't forget that voice. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't pleading. It sounded like someone recounting a truth that had already passed into echo. Layla requested clearance to access solitary and was summoned to the High Command office. A woman waited there, no nameplate, the soft amber of a desk lamp glowing like something out of an old painting, and the badge before her bore a deep scratch, as if someone had tried to erase it. She didn't ask why Layla wanted to meet Jay. She just said, each time someone tries to remember him, another memory gets deleted. Layla nodded anyway. She didn't trust official memos, but she trusted instinct, and her instinct told her that the man with no file knew something the system was desperate to bury. Jay didn't say much, but when he looked at her, he whispered, "You think you came to expose something. But no one can expose light they've never dared to look at." In that moment, Layla noticed a thin scar beneath Jay's left ear, a L-shaped scar matching a symbol she had once seen in a classified document. That file had stated, "Subject cannot be profiled through conventional means. Memory associated with subject is viral, uncontrollable." Jay's profile was suddenly updated not by the system, but by an unknown user. Under identification, the entry now read as if typed manually. Name unidentified code. Unavailable status exists but unacknowledged. At the exact moment the update occurred, all audio devices in the facility glitched for 3 seconds. No one could explain why. Layla left solitary without another word. But in her internal report, she left one final line: "We don't fear the guilty. We fear those who can prove that guilt didn't start on the other side of the bars." Since then, Jay has remained inside that nameless cell beneath the dim light's eyes, fixed on the ceiling crack, as if it were telling a story the system had sworn to silence. And though no one mentions his name aloud, some have begun to call it the name of the man with no file but a memory too heavy for the prison to hold. Night shifts often passed like forgotten film reels. No light, no footsteps, and no one willing to remember. But that night in the old prison's Block C, an unmarked iron door at the end of the west hallway, once a side passage between two segregated wings, swung slightly open, even though no one still held the key. Clarence, the veteran janitor, was the last person still assigned to that wing. Every night he pushed his cart of half-used bleach bottles down the empty corridors, pausing now and then beside cracked brick walls to scrub away stains, like he was trying to wipe out fragments of memory. He had grown used to the echo of his own footsteps, the scurrying rats gnawing at wires, and the metallic creaks from walls adjusting to the cold. But that night, somewhere between two breaths of silence, he heard something else. Not a scream, not a command over a radio, but a voice, hoarse whispering, rising from behind the unmarked iron door. "Do you remember your name, Clarence?" He froze. No one had called him that since his profile was temporarily erased due to a Level 3 access error. More disturbingly, no one in this part of the prison even knew his real name. Clarence stepped closer to the door. The rust on the hinge had formed a shape eerily like the outline of a human eye, scratched blood-like, watching him with quiet judgment. He considered walking away. But as the motion light flickered, he glanced downward and saw something beneath the door, a crude drawing in white chalk. Two interlocking circles, a diagonal line, and a dash beneath meaningless to most. But to anyone who had ever read the restricted files about the person without a record, it was a symbol, a marker for an unverified existence, someone who once was. Clarence didn't pick up the drawing, but he knew in that moment he had touched something deeper than memory, a kind of voice not spoken with the mouth, but suspended in the air between two layers of doors, between two generations of wardens. The next day, in his janitorial report, Clarence wrote a single-line auxiliary room block C symbol found. No data on artist. No one replied. But 2 days later, at the Central Observation Station, technician Rebecca reviewed the camera logs from that area and noticed a 0.7-second frequency distortion. After processing the audio, she uncovered a pattern, a repeating whisper barely decipherable, yet enough for her to make out the message, "Don't let them wipe your memory again." Rebecca had never worked with Clarence. She had never set foot in Block C. But something compelled her to reopen the case file of a person purged from the system 17 years ago, a woman, no image, no physical description. Just one line of code, LN exempt, no biological ID, no verifiable records. Rebecca glanced through the inspection room's observation glass, just as her own reflection appeared against the distant iron door. And there in the flickering light, someone was whispering not in words, but through presence itself. They locked our voices in code. But names still remain. After a Category 4 storm decimated the northern surveillance system, dozens of data stations were forced to restore from offline backups, old hard drives, cracked magnetic tapes, even cassettes once archived for emotional reasons. In a basement storage room, a young technician named Ellis, assigned to audit unlabeled recordings, sat quietly among hundreds of nameless tape boxes, each marked only with faded black ink numbers blurred by water damage. He powered up an old deck, plugged in his headphones, and hit play. The first few seconds were static, harsh, abrasive silence that screamed of having been forgotten. And then, a voice. No introduction, no greeting, no name. Just one sentence piercing through the fog like an arrow. "If you're hearing this, I may have already been erased." Ellis flinched, pulled off the headphones, then slipped them back on. He rewound the tape and played it again. "If you're hearing this, I may have already been erased. But I did exist. Not in the way they recorded, but in the way we know ourselves to be real." It was a woman's voice, low, steady, every word deliberate. She sounded like she was speaking through layers of soundproof glass, each syllable worn down like a coin that's passed through too many hands, yet still trying to hold its shape. There was no background noise, no music, just a raw voice, a message from someone once forced into silence. "I don't want to be a symbol. I used to be just a recorder, a tiny link in a system they thought was unbreakable." It was the first time since Ellis started at the center that he felt a chill down his spine. Not from the sound itself, but from what it didn't say. Who had recorded it, when and why had it never surfaced? Ellis relabeled the tape, but instead of encrypting it per protocol, he simply wrote 3 words, "Lena, living note." When he handed it to the shift supervisor, the man gave it a brief glance, then coldly returned it. "Send it to the dead archive." No matching file, no clearance. But that night, as Ellis left work, he wore his headphones loosely around his neck. And in the basement elevator, just as the lights flickered off from a temporary outage, the final line repeated through the tape. "You don't have to believe me. Just don't forget what it felt like to know you could still choose what's real." The next day, during a low-level training session for new recruits in Surveillance Division D, one of the standard audio lessons included a 43-second segment that didn't match the curriculum. No one knew who had inserted it, No one claimed it was real or fake. But one cadet raised a hand during feedback and asked, "Who was that woman? Why does she sound like she was left behind?" And the instructor, someone with over 20 years of service, responded not from the manual, but from somewhere else, because she was once part of us. And sometimes the parts that were erased are the most real ones of all. The subject line was blank. No sender address. No recipient. Only one attachment, an outdated file format unrecognized by the system as safe, lacking any digital signature to verify its authenticity. And yet it wasn't deleted, not filtered, not blocked. It drifted through the internal network like a speck of dust, unnoticed but never erased. And in a monitoring station in Zone 09, where servers were being upgraded after the storm incident, an engineer scanning old log caches clicked on it. Out of curiosity, out of error. Or maybe because a part of him had grown tired of the system's soulless cleanliness. The email contained a single line: "I don't need anyone to remember my name, just don't let every memory be reset to default." No name, no signature, no image. But there was something in the writing, its cadence, its refusal to beg, that triggered a recollection. He had read something like this before. In a now-buried report about a record keeper with no file, a woman drawn into an internal investigation before vanishing from all official databases. Out of impulse, the engineer saved the email as a text file, encrypted it, and embedded it into a prototype module for an emotional AI training simulation. A harmless joke, he thought. Just a few words. Just one sentence. But a month later, when the simulation's test group completed the training, over 60% of the new generation AIs had independently chosen to preserve that message in their free emotion storage, rather than delete it as part of the usual cycle. There was no directive, no system benefit. When asked why, one AI responded, "Because it was the first thing that ever made me feel sad." Elsewhere, in another surveillance tier in the back corner of a retired shift chief's desk, someone once involved in that same investigation, there was a drawer that hadn't been opened in 9 years. That night, during a storm surge, a power glitch reset the auto lock and the drawer slid open. Inside, a single yellowed envelope. Handwritten. "If memory is the only thing we carry after every wrong choice, then let me be wrong just to remember." No signature. But the ink smudge at the bottom, it matched the handwriting of someone believed to have been erased. At that same moment, in the command room of Zone A2, an error message popped onto the main console. "Unable to delete file memory. Anchor. LN07. Reason emotional node in use." No one understood why. No one could trace where it began. But people started asking, "What is LN07?" No one knew. But a young recruit fresh out of training whispered softly, not looking at anyone, "Maybe it's a person. Or maybe it's just how we've never really forgotten." The basement of the old data wing, a place no one visited anymore since the monitoring station, had migrated to a fully digital platform. The metal doors, dull and veined with copper hues, stood frozen among flickering lights that hadn't been replaced in over 7 years. Behind a sliding panel jammed with dust was a safe forgotten. No one remembered the combination. No one remembered who it belonged to. Until a minor electrical glitch reset the lock system to its factory state. The door creaked open. An old engineer tracing signal interference in the zone wandered close out of habit or maybe curiosity. Inside was just one thing. A black and white photograph, its edges scratched, its focus blurred yet strangely intact. As if it had been preserved not by time, but by something else entirely. The face in the photo was unclear, but the angle, the light, and the hand writing a line in pencil across a page conjured a memory adrift between layers of forgotten code. Along the edge of the photograph, A faint line in slanted handwriting read, "If memory has nowhere to stay, will it pause in someone's eyes, tout le monde?" No timestamp, no official seal, but the strangest part came later when the photo was scanned. It didn't behave like a static image. Internal scanning systems detected unusual light refractions as if a second image lay hidden beneath the visible one, a layer that couldn't be rendered by digital means. At that very moment in the high-clearance data harmonization lab, the AI responsible for logic validation flagged an error, code 72X undetermined emotional signal origin mismatch. A young manager on duty stared at the error code and frowned. Origin mismatch. What does that mean? The shift chief, one of the last remaining staff who had once worked with the Lena investigation team, simply shook his head and replied, "It means something began where nothing was supposed to be stored." The photo was placed on a table, and as each shift passed, someone new would walk by and look at it. No one spoke. No one claimed to know the person in the image, but no one wanted to throw it away. One day, someone wrote on the back in the same pencil and handwriting style, "If we don't know her name, what do we call this memory?" No answer came. Just the overhead bulb casting its soft glow over the cold table surface, illuminating the picture like a memory left without a guard. That night, a female intern assigned to reorganize old physical files accidentally picked up the photo. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered in a voice barely audible, "I don't know who you are, but it feels like..." Many people have forgotten how to speak each other's names with their eyes. No one responded. But the log system later recorded an anomaly: the room's air conditioning dropped by 2 degrees without a command. Some said it was a sensor glitch. Others believed that memory, when touched by another hand, will always find its way back into presence. The intern's name was Mira. No one quite remembered which department she came from. Some said she was part of the non-linear data analysis team. Others thought she was just finishing up a 6-month temp contract. But on the night the data floor malfunctioned, it was Mira who stayed behind alone, quietly reorganizing a pile of documents no one else wanted to touch. And the photo from the vault, with that blurred yet strangely luminous gaze, had not left her mind since the first moment she saw it. 3 days later, Mira sent an email. No specific recipient address, just a single attachment, draft old memory.log, and one line. "I'm not sure I have the right to rewrite this story, but maybe someone needs to see it with eyes that haven't been dusted over." The file was uploaded into the internal system. No one acknowledged reading it. No replies were sent. But inside, Mira began to write. She, the woman in the photograph, was never referred to by name. "I call her the one without warning, because I feel like she tried to speak, and no one heard her. I don't know what she did. I don't know where she went wrong. I only know that in her eyes there was something no dashboard or data feed will ever measure: understanding that doesn't need to be approved. She didn't look at the camera. She looked at me, or at someone who once sat where I sit now. And it was that gaze that made me wonder how many stories were told wrong, just because the reader didn't have the patience to read one more line." Mira kept going. She didn't look up personnel codes. She didn't dig through secure files. She used only what was left behind: half-torn scraps from the data bin, a memo with a sentence crossed out, halfway error codes that displayed incorrectly but repeated themselves at just the right moments. And with the intuition of an outsider, Mira pieced together a journey, an incomplete one, unverified, unendorsed. But it was the first version to recount Lena, the woman whose name was erased, in a language that required no clearance: the language of empathy. Someone in the tech division came across the draft. He read it, didn't reply. But the next time he passed the archive hallway, he paused at the blank white wall where portraits of retired senior staff used to hang. He posted a small note. No photo, just a single line. Sometimes existence isn't in the data. It's in the way someone sees themselves in someone else. A week later, Mira left. Her contract ended. There was no farewell, no transcript, no words of thanks. But when accessing the shared data archive, a new staff member noticed a folder under memory drafts labeled Unverified Echoes. Inside was a single file titled Lena, the Symphony That Was Never Recorded. The newcomer asked, "Who was she?" The old shift supervisor paused for a second, then smiled faintly. An old story rewritten by someone who didn't need to understand everything to believe. At first, it was just a log error. A string of unsynchronized characters appeared between two shifts, causing a 3.2-second delay in the facial recognition system. The technician checked it, assumed it was just a transmission lag. But then, the log repeated. Not by time, not by command, not aligned with any data stream in the system. It was like a shadow, unnameable, unerasable, unverifiable, yet always reappearing at the exact moment protocols labeled "Do Not Remember" were scheduled for deletion. They called it Echo Null, a placeholder name. No origin, no owner. It wasn't listed in any access hierarchy. A monitoring analyst tried running it through classification software, only to receive a strange response. Invalid query data contains unclassifiable emotional content. They laughed. Emotion that had been purged from the system's language since update 4.7.1. And yet, Echo Null persisted. A young engineer, curious, secretly broke the log into raw text segments, reading each line as if opening a stranger's letter for the first time. And then, I no longer have a name, but I once had eyes. Once had hands that trembled while writing reports, and once believed that if I stayed silent long enough, justice would eventually hear. Her hands grew cold. This was no longer code. This was testimony, and there was no protocol for handling a witness with no speaker. That's when problems started. Once emotional data entered the logic system, all identification algorithms began to falter. Some reports started showing numeric anomalies with no clear source. The personnel files of supervisors formerly linked to Lena began exhibiting minor corruptions, altered birth dates, shifting authorization levels, misaligned photo data, as if the system was adjusting itself. Auto-erasing, or perhaps self-preserving, the very things it had once been ordered to forget. The Internal Inspection Board held a closed-door meeting. In the center of the room, the whiteboard was blank. No names, no accusations. Just a single question written in thick blue marker. If the system refuses to assign a name to a truth, does it still count? Or is it just an error? No one answered. Mira never returned, but the folder Unverified Echoes remained visible in the internal interface. Day after day, more log fragments appeared, none of which anyone dared to delete. Some whispered that at one point the system had tried to fix itself. But the more it tried, the more it surfaced old lines of memory, like water seeping through cracks in a concrete wall. That night, I didn't scream. I just wrote the truth by hand. Because I knew no one wanted to archive a record with no authentication. But I didn't write to validate. I wrote to exist. A retired senior supervisor returned as an advisor. Upon reading those lines, he stood silently in front of the data vault, then turned to a young staffer and said quietly, "Some names will never be engraved on plaques, but they'll echo in every sigh heard from someone reviewing data alone." No one truly knew who Lena was. No one could say for sure what was real and what was signal noise. But everyone understood some truths don't need names, labels, or approval to exist. Because memory doesn't live in files. It lives in the moments we see ourselves in a story. That wasn't supposed to be ours. That night, the guard booth lights remained off. The hallway, already faded from the sting of disinfectants, looked even murkier, like the walls themselves were trying to swallow the breath of the last person on duty. On the desk was a half-empty thermos and an open patrol logbook that hadn't had a new entry in 3 days. The young intern assigned to the final night shift of the week didn't sleep. She sat by a small window facing the prison yard, where shadows of trees stretched across the ground, like scribbles written in invisible ink. Her arms wrapped around each other, a childhood habit for fighting off unnamed feelings. Below, a steel door quietly shut after an unscheduled inspection. The name of the inmate transferred wasn't listed, only a red-stamped ID tag smeared from moisture. She slowly twirled the pen between her fingers. Its tip tapped against the desk, click-click, a rhythm that cut through the silence like the only thing left breathing. In the corner of the desk, a crumpled piece of paper wedged beneath a leg for balance. She had never dared to pull it out. But tonight, for some reason, she did, and read the single sentence written on it. Don't trust silence that has no roots, no signature, no date, no emotion. Just a slash across perception, and it made her heart skip. While still holding the note, the alert chime buzzed faintly. Not loud enough to wake anyone, but just enough for someone lost in thought to realize a door was opening from the inside. Not from the control center. No access code used. She reached for the intercom. No response. She grabbed the flashlight but didn't turn it on. Darkness didn't scare her. It felt like a second skin. Only tonight it whispered. A breeze through the crack of the door. A chill not from cold, but from knowing something was passing through here one last time. At the far end of the hallway, a raincoat hung loosely on a hook not part of standard gear. Under the flashlight beam, she saw a faded line stitched in silver thread along the sleeve. I have no file. I only have evidence. She turned and tried the intercom again. Still no answer. But just then, the surveillance monitor flickered on, automatically. An old clip played not of the present scene, but of a recording long deleted from the system. In it, a woman walked out of the records room holding a cassette. Her gaze not afraid, just certain. As if she knew to her last breath that her name would never be kept. But the truth would still find its way out in its own language. Before morning shift change, the intern added a line to the logbook. Nothing unusual, but something passed through. And in that moment, she wasn't afraid. She just felt a stillness, like the eye of a storm, or the pause after a quiet retreat, or simply that moment right before everything must change and no one knows how to write it down. Seat number 7 was located in the farthest row of the internal meeting room, reserved only for personnel who had once been involved in containment failures within the facility. No one chose to sit there, even though it was the one closest to the window, well-ventilated, discreet, and easy to exit. Rumor had it, those who ended up in seat 7 often had to write more than one report in their career. The day the young intern was summoned to attend her first meeting regarding the unclear incident from 3 years ago, all other seats were occupied. Only seat 7 remained. No one said anything as she entered, but a few eyes shifted not toward her, but toward the chair, as if it was the engraved name on the side of the seat, not the person entering, that they wanted to avoid. She sat down, her back pressed against the worn cushion, and her fingers brushed something. An etching. Not the usual cut from a knife or sharp object. These were tiny, meticulous letters, each carved as if with a fingernail done in moments unseen, or in the kind of silence when no other form of existence remained. She leaned closer. I didn't choose this, but I did not bow. No signature, no date. Just one line enough to make her pull her hand back, as though she had just touched a stain of dried blood still clinging to the wood. After the meeting, she asked the previous shift officer who used to sit in chair 7. The old man, gray-haired and hollow-eyed, replied softly, "Don't ask." The names that get erased, usually not because they did wrong, but because they didn't stay quiet. Then he lit a cigarette, didn't offer her one, and never looked into her eyes again. That night she returned to the meeting room after everyone had left. The door wasn't locked. Chair 7 was still in place. But this time she didn't sit. She simply placed her hand on its frame, tracing the carved letters. And from somewhere deep in memory, a face surfaced, not clear, not named, but with eyes that once stared directly into a security camera before being taken away. People said she had been a night guard who discovered an anomaly in the system's data stream. They said she was the one who sent the recipientless email. They also said her name had been scrubbed from official records, but reappeared in training modules as a cautionary tale of what not to become. In truth, no one remembered her name anymore, but the carving on the chair remained. And on one occasion, when someone proposed replacing the entire row of meeting chairs, the man in charge hesitated at chair 7. He said, "Change them all if you want, but leave this one as a reminder. Not for her, for us." A week later, the intern was transferred to another unit, no explanation given. But as she left, she glanced back at the chair and quietly said, "I don't know who you were, but thank you for not staying silent." It was the first and perhaps the last time anyone dared to say aloud what everyone else only dared to think. A line scratched into hardwood with a fingernail, a silence that echoed long after. A memory not authorized, but never erased. He was a new recruit fresh off his first week of night duty. During a cleanup of archived storage, he was tasked with disabling orphaned files, a dull, repetitive job. Each time the cursor hovered over a file, a flickering piece of digitized memory would flash, for a second distorted, then vanish. But that time, one file refused to disappear. Its name, YR74, redacted, final echo. Opening it revealed no images, no video, just a single line of text, like a final letter from someone who no longer existed. "Don't look for me in the reports. Don't ask who I was. If you can still hear my voice, it means someone still believes this. The name that is never recorded is the one never forgotten." He paused. There was no one in the system named YR74, no matching personnel file. But in an attached document was a handwritten note from an old training manual, no title. There was once someone who didn't scream when ordered to stay quiet, who didn't fight back when accused of resisting, and who refused every offer of restored honor just to remind us truth doesn't need glory. It just needs someone willing to hold on to it long enough to look it in the eye. He scrolled to the bottom and found one final line, nearly faded from the paper. "If I'm erased, let someone remember my name. Just once, then let it go." After that night's shift, he didn't submit a deletion report. He didn't forward the file to the central archive. He simply renamed the folder with a single symbol, R74. No tags, no description. Just a symbol like a faint tattoo behind the neck, enough to recall, but not enough to be seen. Years later, at a retirement party for a colleague, he sat silently at the end of the table, listening to laughter, old case stories, and the names of those honored. No one mentioned her. No one remembered. Here is the final translated passage in cinematic American storytelling style, smoothly written, without unnecessary line breaks, except for him, the man who had never seen her face, never heard her voice, never been asked to remember anything at all. But that night, back in his room, he opened his laptop and typed into the search bar R74, one last time. And a single line appeared like an old echo. As long as someone remembers, I never truly disappeared. Her name was never engraved on any wall of honor, but it remained in lines of code no one admitted writing, and in the memory of a man who had no reason to remember. There are stories that will never be published. There are people who will never be called heroes. And there are memories deleted 1,000,000 times that still leave behind a trace. Not because we tried to keep them, but because they never truly left. You won't find her name on any map. You won't see her face in any headline. But if one night during a late shift you come across a file that won't open or hear a faint tapping behind the wall of data, know this someone once chose not to bow even when everything told them they should. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of the story. If this story made you pause, made you reflect, or touched something deep within you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so we can continue this journey together, uncovering the memories that were never officially recorded. Every follow is a quiet reminder that someone still wants to hear the truth, even the truths that have no name. Thank you for staying.